Hello and welcome to a new video. I haven't done a modern make in a while, so I thought that's what I would do for this one. I'm doing McCall's M8195 and I'm going to do view C with a puff sleeve. I was lucky enough to have this exact print in my stash. That was a complete happy accident, and so I'm excited to make view C in the exact same print as the pattern envelope. So starting with the bodice, we're going to be using piece number 2, number 4, number 5, and number 6. And then we have our sleeve pattern, which is piece number 7. We have 2 elastic guides, which are pieces 8 and 9, and then my favorite, the pocket stitches, number 10. The skirt pieces are number 11 and number 12. So I'm starting by laying out the giant sleeve pattern. These puff sleeves take so much fabric, but they are definitely worth it. The puff sleeve is a big trend right now, and I think it's because it's feminine, but at the same time, it's still very bold. It's a fairy tale. It's the word of 2020, escapism. But my research shows 2018 is when this trend made its grand re-emergence. We see versions of the puff sleeve in 1818 and 1918, the 1870s and the 1970s. There has been many different variations, the leg of mutton, balloon, Juliet, and I'm sure there are a lot of others. The puff sleeve has been here and gone and back plenty of times. History always repeats itself for the good and the bad. But for me, these puff sleeves are all good, and today I'm going to do the modern interpretation. So after I cut everything out of my green check fabric, I cut everything out of a white lining as well. I'm not sure exactly what kind of fabric this is. I'm guessing it's whatever lining is made out of, but that's what I used. All of the bodice pieces have to be lined. And then I transferred all of my notches and all of my marking. And then instead of going right to work on the bodice, I started with the skirt because this was cut on the bias and I knew I was going to want it to hang for a few days so that I could hem it later. So the first thing I did was pin on the pockets and stitch those in place and then assemble the skirt, which was very straightforward, very easy. This entire dress was pretty quick and fairly easy to do. I chose it because I wanted to do something modern. I hadn't sewn a modern garment in a while, but it's reminding me a lot of some of the vintage patterns that I've purchased recently from the 1960s and 70s. So history definitely repeats itself as fashion does. And this dress is definitely my aesthetic. It's a modern take on a very vintage style. So I love this pattern. But I could have went with a size 12, which was for a 34 bust and a 26.5-inch waist. I think I could have definitely done that and been comfortable with it. Once again, this is what happens when you don't do a muslin. So yeah, it's time to start doing those. But I always use really inexpensive cotton, so you'll hear me say this all the time. It's like my wearable muslin. So when I make the pattern again, I do take all of these notes and put them in there, so that way I won't make the same mistakes twice. History will not repeat itself. So with all of that, you've seen the skirt come together fairly easily, and here it is in all of its glory. I'm going to let it hang for a few days so that way the hem can be level, and I'm super happy about the pockets. That makes this dress even better. And with that, I begin work on the bodice, starting with pieces number 6 and piece number 2. And as I go, I'm doing all of the same things to the lining fabric as well. Even though for some reason the instructions never tell you to do it that way, it always just makes more sense to get the steps done at the same time, at least in my opinion. So I am attaching pieces number 6 and 2, and I actually did this upside down. So if you sew this garment, make sure you have the 2 notches pointing up and not down. It was very easy to do this wrong if you weren't paying attention, so I ended up having to pick apart the pieces on the bodice as well as the lining, and the lining was really thin and didn't take the picking well. So if you can avoid that mistake, do it. Just make sure you have the pieces going in the right direction when you attach them. Next we have piece number 4 and piece number 5. Piece number 4 was cut on a fold, so it's just one of those, and then we have 2 of piece number 5 that we will attach to the sides. And then we start working on the sleeves, where we'll be using bias tape to make channels to put the elastic in, which is a technique that I hadn't seen used before. Normally I would just fold the fabric over and stitch it twice and make a little channel, but the bias tape trick, I really liked that. It made it look really neat and clean in the inside. And this was done by first pressing open one end of the bias tape and then stitching it down, right sides together, and then of course folding it over and stitching very close to the edge, and then just feeding the elastic through. And they give you they give you a little measuring guide from which to measure the elastic to see how long it needs to be, but I found that these measurements were way off. You're definitely going to have to do some adjusting yourself. So once you get the elastic in there, just try it on and see how it fits. I ended up doing that with the bottom elastic, which I put in exactly the same way as the top, even though the instructions give you a different method. I just did it the same way because I really like that method, but you're definitely going to want to put on and test and put on and test. And then when you have a fit that you're comfortable with, you're going to attach the sleeve to the side front of the bodice, side front top of the bodice. And then once you have that attached, or stitched on rather, it will be time to attach the lining. And I found this a little tricky at first to figure out exactly how to place it with the sleeve already on there. I thought it was weird, but it ended up making perfect sense. You just put the sleeve in between the pieces and put them right sides together, because you're only going to stitch around the front and the top. So then that way you can flip the lining over and the insides are nice and neat and the edges are finished as well. So I proceeded with stitching the lining all down, and then I trimmed the seam allowance and pressed it really nice and neat. And for the most part, the hard work on the bodice was done. And then this middle part had to be gathered between the two circles, and I just did that by hand with a needle and thread. And then it was time to attach the skirt to the bodice. But before I had a chance to do that, Major wanted to go to the library and talk about history repeating itself. She is just like me. She loves books and to read, and I'm so proud of her. And I'm also proud of our local library. They had so many books with little brown babies on them that look like Major, even though it's not really what our area looks like. But I was proud that they took the steps and that she had those options there for her. So then when we came back, I decided to add some piping to the bottom of the bodice. So I used piping in my 1940s video that I did, the secret patterns with Serena. I'll link it. But after that, I'm like hooked on piping. I really love the look of it so much. So I added some to this dress. And then after that, all I had to do was lay the right sides together to attach the bodice to the skirt. So I got it all pinned in place. I stitched it together, and then I hemmed the bottom of the skirt and put in the zipper. And with all of that, this make was done. I'm going to show it to you here now on the mannequin, but don't click off just yet. I want you to see pictures of me wearing it and hear a little bit of my thoughts on this pattern and if you should purchase it or not. And yes, I definitely think you should purchase it, but definitely purchase it when it's on sale. I usually always wait until McCalls is having either a $2.99 sale or a $3.99 sale before I purchase the patterns. And I caught this one on a $3.99 sale, so it was definitely worth it. I will definitely, as I said before, go down a couple of sizes. This ended up coming out a little bit big on me, and it could use some altering in a couple places, but other than that, I'm very pleased with how it came out. It was easy and pretty fast. The instructions were pretty straightforward, and the order of construction made a lot of sense. So overall, I was definitely pleased with this pattern from McCall's new spring and summer collection. I love the history repeating itself aspect, and when vintage things become modern and modern things are influenced by the vintage. So if you're into that as well, please feel free to subscribe and stick around. And I'll see you in my next video that is soon and sure to come.